Hi everyone! Today you will hear the novel Dandelion Wine by Ray Bradbury. You'll also learn a new word, dandelion, which is a small, bright yellow flower. This story is about a boy named Douglas who spends a magical summer making dandelion wine and learning about life. He discovers how to keep his special memories and understand the passage of time.
Douglas Spaulding, a 12-year-old boy, lived in a small town in Illinois where every summer felt like a real fairy tale. The summer of 1928 was no exception. This time of year always seemed magical to him, filled with bright impressions, discoveries, and amazing moments. But this year, in addition to the usual childhood joys, Douglas faced the realization that life is not only about happy moments, but also about loss, sadness, and understanding how quickly time passes. One day, while walking with his younger brother Tom, Douglas found a field full of dandelions. These small golden flowers seemed to invite him to pick them and save the summer in a bottle. Inspired by the idea, Douglas and Tom started gathering dandelions with such enthusiasm as if it was the most precious harvest in their lives. Their goal was clear: to make wine from these flowers that would capture not just the taste of summer, but also all the memories, joys, worries, hopes, and dreams. Douglas was the kind of boy who could see something more in simple things. For him, dandelions were not just flowers. He saw in them symbols of sunlight, freedom, and childhood.
You know, Tom, when we look at dandelions, we only see small flowers. But if you think about it, each one holds a whole summer inside. They are like little suns that we can take with us in a bottle.
Tom smiled and nodded, continuing to gather the flowers. For them, this activity became a real ritual, a symbol that summer would not end if it could be saved in bottles of wine. A few days passed, and their grandmother taught the boys how to make dandelion wine. She, like a wise sorceress, knew the secrets of saving summer in bottles. The process was fascinating and laborious. The dandelions had to be carefully picked, then cleaned, leaving only the bright yellow petals. These petals were then soaked in water, sugar, lemon, and yeast were added, and all of this turned into a magical drink that had to be aged for several weeks. Douglas and Tom watched every step closely, trying not to miss a single detail. They saw how the golden petals turned into fragrant wine, and every day they would go to the bottles to smell the summer. This wine became a symbol of their childhood, a symbol of a time they would never forget. But Douglas realized that summer is not only about joy and happiness. One day, he experienced the pain of loss when he learned about the death of their neighbor, Mrs. Bentley. For Douglas, Mrs. Bentley was a symbol of something eternal, ancient, and wise, and her passing made him think for the first time about how quickly life goes by. Mrs. Bentley often told Douglas stories about her childhood, about how she was young and beautiful, about her first dances and walks under the moon. But one day, when she showed him an old photo where she was a young girl, Douglas didn't believe it was her.
That's not you, Mrs. Bentley. That's impossible.
Douglas exclaimed, looking at the photo. Mrs. Bentley gently smiled and said,
"We were all young once, Douglas. Time changes us, but inside we stay the same people we once were. It's hard to understand when you're only 12, but with time you'll see that each of us carries many lives inside."
These words stayed with Douglas forever. After Mrs. Bentley's death, he thought a lot about how time is not only a friend, but also an enemy that relentlessly takes away everything dear. Summer continued, and life once again filled with bright moments. Douglas and Tom spent more and more time in nature, observing its wonders and enjoying every moment. But Douglas couldn't forget about Mrs. Bentley and how fleeting life is. On one sunny day, the brothers decided to visit the market, where there were always many interesting things. There, they met an old man, Mr. Jonas, who sold antique items. His stall was full of amazing things: old clocks, faded photos, and yellowed pages of old books. Douglas was fascinated by this man who seemed to know everything about life and time. They often talked, and Mr. Jonas shared his philosophy about time.
Time, Douglas, is something you can't see, but you can feel it. It's like the wind, invisible but tangible, and you can't hold it. We live in it, but it flows through us like a river through our fingers. Everything you see here on this stall is pieces of time that once belonged to other people.
These words stuck in Douglas's mind, and he began to understand that time is a mysterious force that affects everything in his life. It was both frightening and exciting because it meant that every moment is unique and will never happen again. Over time, Douglas started to realize that each summer is not just a break from school, but a small life full of events and emotions. He understood that in these simple joys, like picking dandelions, the meaning of life was hidden.
Tom, I think the most important thing in life is not just to live, but to remember how you lived. If you don't remember, then it's as if it never happened.
Douglas said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. Tom looked at his brother with surprise, but then nodded. In his childlike understanding, these words seemed simple, but he knew there was something important in them that he would understand only years later. Douglas also began to notice how time affected the people around him. He saw how his parents became more thoughtful, how the neighbors' children, who were recently small, began to grow and mature quickly. All this made him think about how time flows continuously, and you can't stop it, but you can remember it, keep it in memories. At the end of summer, Douglas decided that he needed to do something special to keep the memory of this time. He gathered all his notes, observations, and memories and decided to create his own diary, which he called the Summer Diary. This diary would become his personal memory box, where he would write down everything he saw, felt, and experienced this summer. He began to write his thoughts about each day, about every moment that seemed important to him. He wrote about how he and Tom gathered dandelions, how they made wine, how they watched the stars and talked about the meaning of life. He wrote about Mr. Jonas and his wise words, about Mrs. Bentley and her stories of youth.
Tom, I want us to keep this summer forever. On each page of this diary will be our time, our childhood. When we grow up, we can return to these pages and remember how happy we were.
Tom happily agreed and promised to help his brother. Together they began to record every important event, every thought, every feeling that filled them during this amazing summer. As the summer began to come to an end, Douglas and his family gathered the last dandelions and made a few more bottles of wine. Now, every time Douglas opened a bottle of this wine, he would remember this summer, its joys and sorrows, all the lessons it taught him. He realized that even though time moves forward relentlessly, he has a way to stop it, to save moments, and to enjoy memories. After all, real dandelion wine is not just a drink, it is life itself, sealed in a bottle so it can be opened again and again. The story of Douglas Spaulding and his summer diary came to an end, but he knew that it was just the beginning of his journey, his life, full of wonderful discoveries, joys, and sorrows. Dandelion wine became a symbol of his childhood, his summer, and that eternal light he would carry in his heart always.
Dandelion, it means a small, bright yellow flower that grows in fields and lawns. Example, Douglas found a field full of dandelions. Harvest, it means the process or period of gathering crops or plants. Example, they started gathering dandelions with such enthusiasm as if it was the most precious harvest in their lives. Petal, it means a colored part of a flower that surrounds the center. Example, Douglas and Tom carefully placing golden dandelion petals into glass jars. Aging, it means the process of something getting older, often used for wine or cheese to improve its quality. Example, the wine had to be aged for several weeks. Fragrant, it means having a pleasant smell. Example, they saw how the golden petals turned into fragrant wine. Antique, it means something that is old and often valuable. Example, Mr. Jonas sold antique items at the market. Trinket, it means a small, inexpensive piece of jewelry or decorative object. Example, his stall was full of amazing things, old clocks, books, and trinkets. Porch, it means a covered area at the entrance of a house. Example, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. Profound, it means having deep meaning or serious importance. Example, Mr. Jonas shared something profound with Douglas.